The son of a cleaning lady dared to say 4 words that silenced a billionaire. I speak 9 languages. The tycoon laughed in his Manhattan penthouse, mocking the boy, mocking his mother. But within minutes, that laughter would die in his throat. Because the child he ridiculed wasn't just fluent in 9 languages. He was about to expose a secret so devastating, it could destroy the empire of a man who thought he was untouchable. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. His mother, Evelyn Brooks, had spent decades polishing the glass towers of New York City, her hands raw from chemicals, her dignity tested daily by men in suits who never looked her in the eye. On this day, she had her son, Caleb, beside her, a boy whose mind was sharper than the marble floors he walked on. What no one in that penthouse knew was that Caleb had built his world out of library books and second-hand dictionaries, stacking knowledge the way others stacked fortunes. By the age of 15, he could charm a room in French, negotiate in Arabic, debate in German, and disarm with Japanese poetry, all while living in a cramped apartment where the heat barely worked. And now, standing before a man who thought money was power, Caleb's quiet voice carried something stronger, the ability to dismantle arrogance with truth. Evelyn Brooks cleaned the grandest penthouses in Midtown Manhattan. Her son, Caleb Brooks, stood beside her, eyes steady, holding a battered backpack that held his voice, not his worth. In that room, money glistened like metal, and the smell of power hung heavy. A billionaire sneered down at Caleb. "You speak 9 languages?" As though it was a joke. But those 4 words broke something in that man's world. He laughed until Aaron responded in flawless Mandarin, French, Arabic, Russian, Italian, Japanese, German, Portuguese, and Spanish. And in that moment, the sneer froze. Because Caleb didn't just speak 9 languages, he wielded them. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Who really was Caleb Brooks? The boy with no money but 9 languages at his command. To some, he was nothing more than the son of a woman who scrubbed floors to survive. A child who should never have stood in the presence of men who measured worth by gold and concrete. Yet in the heart of Manhattan, before the gaze of a man whose empire stretched from Dubai to New York, Caleb became something else. Why did this Arab millionaire, a man accustomed to bending politicians, mocking rivals, and silencing enemies, take such interest in humiliating a child of poverty? Was it arrogance, or was it fear? And what secret was so dangerous it could bring down a man who considered himself untouchable by wealth, power, or politics? As the room grew quiet, the world tilted, and viewers will soon learn how a child's knowledge, sharpened in silence, turned into a weapon. Evelyn Brooks was a woman of quiet resilience, the kind of strength that never makes headlines but carves its mark in the lives it touches. She rose before the city stirred, her hands raw from bleach and her knees aching from scrubbing marble floors that did not belong to her. For years, Evelyn cleaned the estates of the wealthy, men and women whose discarded wine bottles and untouched banquets could have fed her family for months. Yet, she never envied them. Her world was not built on resentment but on a single devotion, her son, Caleb Brooks. Every dollar she earned stretched thin across rent for a cramped 1-room apartment, groceries that barely lasted a week, and a stack of second-hand school supplies. Evelyn could not afford luxury, but she paid in sweat for one thing she believed would never be taken from Caleb: the chance to learn. Caleb Brooks grew up in a world of noise, the roar of subways, the hum of crowded streets, and the muffled arguments of neighbors through thin walls. But in his heart, there was silence, a silence filled with words. Caleb was different. While other boys played ball in the alleys, Caleb lingered in libraries, his hands tracing the edges of worn dictionaries and old language books that others had long abandoned. He had no tutors, no private lessons, yet his hunger for knowledge drove him deeper into the maze of words. French, Spanish, Russian, Mandarin, Arabic, Italian, German, Portuguese, Swahili. By the time most children could barely master one language, Caleb had devoured 9. To Evelyn, it was both a wonder and a weight. She often sat awake at night asking herself how a boy born in poverty could carry such a gift, and what price the world might demand for it. The contrast was impossible to ignore. While Evelyn and Caleb shared stale bread in their dim kitchen, the Arab millionaire dined in chandeliers of crystal, his tables heavy with silver platters and imported wines. His name circled through power circles in both Washington and Dubai, whispered by politicians who feared him, courted by businessmen who envied him. His estate stretched like empire's glass towers in the city, desert villas gilded with marble, garages lined with exotic cars that never touched ordinary streets. To him, poverty was not even a memory, but an inconvenience he thought could be mocked, crushed, and forgotten. And yet fate had drawn a line between his life and Caleb's, a line he would soon regret ever crossing. Evelyn's sacrifices were endless, though few ever saw them. She skipped meals so Caleb could eat. She carried cleaning supplies across the city at night while Caleb slept, never letting him know she sometimes collapsed from exhaustion. She could not give him wealth, but she gave him discipline, courage, and the belief that his mind was his only weapon. And she was right. What Evelyn Brooks could not have foreseen was that her son's brilliance, forged in hunger and sharpened by solitude, would one day be the very thing to shake the foundations of a man who had believed himself untouchable. Caleb Brooks was not just a child of poverty. He was a storm waiting in silence, and the moment of collision with the millionaire's pride was coming closer with every step. It was a night Evelyn Brooks would never forget. Manhattan glowed under a canopy of lights as she arrived at the penthouse of Karim Al-Fahd, the Arab millionaire whose fortune commanded entire skylines. Evelyn had been asked to work late, polishing crystal floors that reflected the grandeur of a world she could never enter. She had no choice but to bring her son, Caleb Brooks, quietly ushering him into the corner with the promise that he would remain invisible. But Karim noticed. The man who had entertained senators at his dining table and oil magnates in his lounge glanced at the boy with a smirk that carried cruelty. "So," Karim said, his voice heavy with disdain, "you've brought a janitor's son into my world. Is this what ambition looks like? A child destined for nothing, wandering where he does not belong." The words struck Evelyn like a blade, but Caleb did not flinch. Silence settled in the room, heavy and humiliating, until Caleb lifted his head and answered with a calmness no one expected. "I speak 9 languages." The declaration seemed absurd in the lavish setting of men who measured worth in billions, yet the certainty in Caleb's voice froze even Karim Al-Fahd for a moment. Then laughter erupted. Karim leaned back in his leather chair, his guests chuckling at what they assumed was the arrogance of a poor boy. But Caleb did not laugh. His eyes locked on Karim, and he began to speak not in English but in flawless Arabic. The room stilled. The accent, the cadence, the command of words were unmistakable. Karim's smile faltered. Before he could respond, Caleb shifted to French, rolling each syllable with Parisian precision. Then Russian, his tongue twisting with sharp consonants, followed by Mandarin. The tones flawless. Every sentence sliced through the disbelief of the men who watched. The laughter that once filled the room had turned to a silence more dangerous than rage. Karim Al-Fahd's hand tightened around his glass, his composure slipping with each word Caleb delivered. This was no trick. This boy, the son of a cleaning woman, was commanding the room with knowledge that no wealth could purchase. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their smiles fading as the performance became something more than entertainment. And then Caleb paused. Switching once more to Arabic, he asked a question not about books, not about history, but about a detail so precise, so intimate, that only Karim's inner circle should have known it. The words struck like a hidden dagger, one that carried with it the weight of secrets buried beneath Karim's empire. Karim's face drained of color, his silence louder than any denial. Caleb Brooks had revealed something more than talent. He had revealed knowledge that could destroy. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. Karim Al-Fahd, a man accustomed to ridicule without consequence, now found himself mocked by truth rather than poverty. The room seemed to close in on him as Caleb's question lingered, unanswered, echoing in the marble hall like an accusation. Evelyn Brooks watched in shock, her heart pounding, realizing her son had not merely defended his dignity, he had pierced the armor of a man who believed himself untouchable. The air grew cold, and though no one spoke, every guest knew they had witnessed something dangerous, something that could not be forgotten. Caleb Brooks was no longer just the boy of poverty. He was the keeper of a secret powerful enough to unravel Karim's empire. And this was only the beginning. The story of that Manhattan evening did not stay within the gilded walls of Karim Al-Fahd's penthouse. Word traveled quickly, first whispered among the wealthy guests who had witnessed the spectacle, then carried into the corridors of influence where reputations could crumble overnight. A boy, the son of a cleaning lady, had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful men in the city. Soon, reporters caught wind of the confrontation, spinning it into headlines that were impossible to ignore. Millionaire mocked by child prodigy in 9 languages. What began as gossip transformed into a public fascination. Who was Caleb Brooks? And how had a boy from poverty commanded a room of billionaires? For Evelyn Brooks, it was both a mother's pride and a mother's terror. She saw the curiosity building, and with it, the danger that came when the powerful felt exposed. What Caleb had revealed was not just a gift, it was a threat. As the media frenzy grew, questions began circling around Karim Al-Fahd himself. Journalists, always eager for cracks in the armor of the untouchable elite, started pulling at threads. The deeper they dug, the darker the picture became. Offshore accounts in jurisdictions notorious for secrecy, shell corporations spread across 3 continents, payments linked to government officials, businessmen, and entities that existed only on paper. For years, Karim had hidden behind a fortress of wealth and influence. But now the smallest of incidents had drawn the world's gaze directly onto him. And strangely, it was Caleb Brooks who had provided the key. His mastery of languages meant he could parse documents, translate casual conversations, and understand coded exchanges that adults had dismissed. What others ignored as meaningless chatter, Caleb decoded as evidence. The boy was seeing patterns no one else dared to look for, and those patterns pointed to one man, Karim Al-Fahd. Still, there were skeptics. Some dismissed Caleb Brooks as a precocious child whose performance had been exaggerated. They argued that a boy could not possibly unravel the dealings of a man who had evaded scrutiny for decades. But Caleb was no ordinary child. Night after night, Evelyn Brooks found him poring over second-hand dictionaries, teaching himself from worn-out textbooks, and tracing the connections between words and cultures. Where most saw complexity, Caleb saw clarity. And piece by piece, the puzzle began to fit. Journalists began to notice the consistency in his claims. Conversations overheard at Karim's events lined up with financial records uncovered abroad. Names mentioned in passing were connected to hidden accounts. At first it seemed improbable, even impossible. But every thread Caleb touched led somewhere real. What began as ridicule had turned into a trail that pointed toward corruption on a scale few dared to imagine. The investigation gathered momentum. Law enforcement agencies, initially hesitant to involve themselves in what seemed like a social scandal, now had cause to act. Rival businessmen, eager to see Karim weakened, quietly fueled the fire by leaking fragments of information. Journalists from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East joined in, chasing leads that stretched far beyond Manhattan. And at the center of it all was a boy, a cleaning lady's son, who had turned knowledge into a weapon sharper than any blade. For Evelyn Brooks, the unease only deepened. Each headline that carried Caleb's name was another reason for Karim Al-Fahd to see him not as a child, but as a threat. The walls were closing in around Karim, but the danger was also closing in on the boy who had unknowingly ignited it all. The turning point came not in a lavish penthouse or whispered backroom deal, but in the quiet determination of a boy who refused to remain invisible. Caleb Brooks had gathered more than scattered fragments of gossip, he had collected proof. In a battered folder tucked beneath his arm were documents, transcripts and translated notes that tied Karim Al-Fahd's fortune to transactions that crossed borders illegally. It wasn't mere speculation. These were wire transfers routed through obscure banks, shipping manifests doctored in languages Karim never expected an American child to read, and coded emails where the subtle choice of words betrayed illicit intent. When Caleb revealed this evidence, the shock rippled outward. Even Karim's closest allies, men who had built their wealth alongside his, recoiled as if seeing him for the first time. The illusion of untouchable power began to fracture, and at its center stood a boy who should have been dismissed as powerless. The revelations did not stay hidden in the shadows of investigation. They burst into public view in the form of hearings, press conferences, and courtroom proceedings that transfixed the nation. In reenactments, journalists captured the drama like scenes from a trial. Karim Al-Fahd, seated before questioning, his carefully polished image unraveling as documents were read aloud, each one pointing to another lie, another manipulation, another theft. His voice, once commanding, now faltered under the weight of evidence that spoke in multiple languages. And in one striking moment, Evelyn Brooks herself was called to speak. Standing before a crowd that could barely comprehend her journey, she told of the nights she scrubbed the offices of men like Karim, while her son sat quietly in the corner, whispering words from borrowed dictionaries. She described the sacrifices, the hunger, the quiet perseverance that had shaped a child into something extraordinary. Her words carried more weight than any ledger. The image of a mother testifying for her son struck a nerve deeper than any financial scandal could. Here was Evelyn Brooks, a woman who had cleaned the very floors on which Karim Al-Fahd built his empire, now standing to reveal that her son had exposed him. The humiliation was complete. Karim, once untouchable, now found himself cornered not by rival tycoons or political adversaries, but by the people he considered beneath his notice. His allies fell silent, distancing themselves from the man they once hailed as indestructible. Each new revelation pulled another stone from the foundation of his empire, and before the world's eyes, the great facade crumbled. What had begun as a moment of mockery at a dinner party now stood as the undoing of a fortune built on shadows. And at the heart of it all was Caleb Brooks, the boy whose knowledge had rewritten the balance of power. The fall of Karim Al-Fahd was not immediate, but it was unstoppable. Investigations stretched across countries, each confirming details Caleb had unearthed. What seemed unbelievable weeks earlier was now undeniable fact. Karim's empire of influence, mansions, cars, political connections was revealed as hollow, built on lies and stolen wealth. And yet, the true emotional climax was not in the numbers or accounts, but in the story of how the truth emerged. A boy, overlooked because of poverty, had wielded his gift for languages to expose what governments and banks had ignored. A mother, dismissed as a cleaner, had raised a son capable of challenging the world's elite. Their story became a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest voices, when rooted in truth, could bring down giants. For Karim, the trial was his ruin. For Caleb and Evelyn, it was the moment the world finally saw them not as invisible, but as undeniable. The final act of Karim Al-Fahd's downfall was not a dramatic arrest in front of flashing cameras, nor a single courtroom sentence that ended it all. Instead, it was quieter and unraveling. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized. One by one, the lavish penthouses emptied, the exotic cars disappeared, and the politicians who once smiled beside him quietly erased their photos. The man who had mocked Evelyn Brooks and her son as insignificant was now reduced to a name synonymous with corruption. Karim was stripped of the only things he valued: his power, his wealth, and his reputation. And when the world looked to see who had toppled such a figure, the answer was not a government or a rival billionaire. It was a boy from the cramped apartment blocks of New York. Caleb Brooks had forced the mighty to their knees with nothing more than words spoken in 9 languages. But what became of Caleb after the storm? Still a child, he never sought the spotlight. He did not crave headlines or the glare of fame. Yet he became something larger than his own story. he became a symbol. To millions who read his name in newspapers or saw his face on television, Caleb Brooks represented possibility. The boy mocked for being a janitor's son had proven that brilliance could rise from the most unlikely of places. His resilience and intellect cut through the arrogance of wealth, reminding a world obsessed with money that knowledge could not be bought, only earned. Teachers cited his story. Children in struggling neighborhoods spoke his name with pride. And Evelyn, his mother, who once worked late nights scrubbing the floors of men like Karim, now walked with her head high, her sacrifices no longer hidden but celebrated. In the end, the story was never just about corruption or the downfall of one man. It was about a reversal of power, a lesson the world struggled to ignore. Karim Al-Fahd had believed that fortune made him untouchable, that arrogance could shield him from consequence. But Caleb Brooks revealed a truth that cut deeper than wealth. That knowledge, determination, and the courage to speak can dismantle empires built on lies. In Evelyn's eyes, her son was still just the boy who read dictionaries by the dim light of a borrowed lamp. Yet to the world, Caleb had become living proof that even the most invisible voices could shake the foundations of power. So what truly holds the greatest power in a world built on money and arrogance? Is it the fortune amassed in steel towers and offshore accounts, or the mind of a child sharpened by hunger, determination, and a refusal to remain small? Caleb Brooks's story leaves us with a haunting truth. Wealth can be stolen, empires can crumble, but knowledge once earned cannot be taken. And sometimes it is that knowledge hidden in the most unlikely of places that changes everything. As Karim Al-Fahd's empire fell, and Caleb Brooks's name spread beyond the borders of New York, a larger question lingered. Do you believe knowledge can truly break down the walls money builds? Or was Caleb's victory only possible because the truth he uncovered was simply too big, too dangerous to be ignored? For Evelyn Brooks, the answer was clear. Her sacrifices, her quiet strength, her faith in a boy that the world dismissed, had not only changed her son's destiny, but had shaken the foundation of a millionaire's empire. And yet for every story like Caleb's, there are countless others where truth remains buried, where power silences the voices that dare to rise. But tonight you've witnessed what happens when the underestimated fight back. A child of poverty, armed with nothing but knowledge, courage, and determination, brought the mighty to their knees. Now, I turn to you. What do you believe holds the most power, wealth, or wisdom? Leave your answer in the comments below. Your voice matters, and in this community, your perspective shapes the discussion. And if you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear what happened when a billionaire left his safe open to test his maid, and her reaction left him utterly speechless. That story will shake you just as much as Caleb Brooks's did, perhaps even more. So don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe now, hit the bell so you never miss a premiere, and join us as we continue uncovering the hidden stories of power, betrayal, and resilience. Because sometimes, the truth is stranger and more powerful than fiction.